Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Deep Dive Daily. Okay, today we're talking about something that is honestly straight out of a disaster movie. The ground in the Arctic is exploding. Yeah, you heard me right. The actual planet is exploding. Let's get into it. So let's set the scene. It's 2014, and a helicopter crew is flying over the Siberian tundra. We're talking about a vast, empty, frozen landscape. And then they see it. This massive, gaping hole just ripped into the earth. It looked so impossible that one scientist, Susan Natali, literally said, "The ground has exploded. This is not real." It just looked completely alien. And I mean, this thing was a monster. It was over 80 feet wide and deeper than a 15-story building. So, of course, scientists started scrambling for answers. Was it an asteroid? Nope. A weird volcano? No. A sinkhole? Definitely not. Nothing made sense. And the craziest part? This was just the first one. All right, so here's how they knew this wasn't just some boring old sinkhole. A sinkhole, right? It just collapses inward, leaving a flat edge. But this thing had a raised rim, like something had blown up from underneath. And get this, chunks of rock and ice were thrown almost a kilometer away. This wasn't a collapse. This was a massive, violent explosion coming from deep underground. So, with all the usual suspects ruled out, what was left? Investigators actually rappelled down into this terrifying hole. And down at the bottom, they found their smoking gun. The air was thick with incredibly high concentrations of one specific gas. And that mystery gas? Methane. And this, right here, is where a weird story about a hole in the ground turns into something so much bigger with massive implications for all of us. This is where the mystery connects directly to our warming planet. So, quick science lesson if you don't know, methane is basically natural gas. It is super, super flammable. So when you get a ton of it trapped underground, building up pressure, and then it mixes with a little bit of air, you've basically got the perfect recipe for a natural bomb. And remember how I said that first crater wasn't the only one? Well, they found at least 8 of them since 2014, and they all have one thing in common. They appeared during really, really warm years in the Arctic, a place that's already heating up twice as fast as the rest of the globe. You can see the pattern, and honestly, it is terrifying. Then, the story jumps over to Alaska, where things get even weirder. A pilot was flying around and spotted a lake that was bubbling so intensely, the scientists who went to check it out literally called it a jacuzzi lake. So what was making the bubbles? You guessed it, pure methane. But the amount is what's absolutely staggering. This one lake is pumping out over 10 tons of methane every single day. That is the most intense methane seep ever found in the entire Arctic. The scale is just off the charts. Okay, so we have exploding craters in Siberia, a bubbling jacuzzi lake in Alaska. What's the connection here? Well, it all comes down to one thing that lies beneath both of these spots, something called permafrost. So permafrost is pretty much what it sounds like, permanently frozen ground. And it's not a small patch, it covers a quarter of the northern hemisphere. The best way to think about it is like a giant ancient freezer that's been locking away plants, animals, and microbes for thousands and thousands of years. But here is the problem. Our planet is getting warmer, and that giant freezer, it's starting to fail. The permafrost is beginning to thaw for the first time in millennia. And everything that's been trapped inside is now waking up and getting out. And that, my friends, is a huge game changer for our climate. How much are we talking about? Scientists estimate there are about 1,400 billion tons of carbon locked away in that frozen ground. Let that sink in. That is nearly twice the amount of carbon that's currently in our entire atmosphere. It is a massive carbon time bomb just waiting to go off. So here's what happens. As the ground thaws, all these ancient microbes that have been frozen for ages wake up. And they're hungry. So they start eating all this organic material that's also thawing out. And as they digest it, they release gas. In this case, greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane, which go right into the atmosphere. And this is exactly why it's such a big deal. Scientists call this a climate wildcard. Why? Because it's a huge new source of greenhouse gases that our current climate models haven't really accounted for. It's a massive curveball that could change everything we thought we knew about our climate future. And the reason scientists are especially freaked out about the methane is this. We talk about CO2 all the time, right? Well, methane is like CO2 on steroids. In the short term, it's about 30 times more powerful at trapping heat. It's an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. And don't just take my word for it.
As ecologist Katie Walter Anthony puts it, these emissions are not fully included in our climate models. That makes it, in her words, a scary wildcard. We're essentially flying into a future with this huge, unpredictable variable that we don't fully understand.
And just when you think this story can't get any more alarming, oh, but it does. Because when scientists studied that bubbling leak, they realized something terrifying. The methane wasn't just coming from the thawing permafrost near the surface. There was a second source, coming from much, much deeper. Okay, so here's how this two-source problem works. First, the top layer of permafrost thaws, releasing its carbon. But that thawing process also creates these deep, unfrozen tunnels, like chimneys, that punch down through the frozen earth. These chimneys then become escape routes for ancient fossil methane that's been trapped for millions of years miles below the surface. The permafrost is turning into Swiss cheese, and it's letting out this even bigger, older pocket of gas. And this all kicks off something called a positive feedback loop, which, trust me, is not positive for us. It works like this. We cause warming, which thaws the permafrost. That releases more greenhouse gases. Those gases cause, you guessed it, even more warming, which thaws more permafrost. It's a vicious cycle that could start accelerating all on its own. So, you see, these exploding craters and bubbling lakes are more than just bizarre scientific mysteries. They're like giant warning shots being fired from the Arctic. It's the planet telling us something is deeply wrong. And it leaves us with a pretty terrifying question. Are we at all ready for what comes next?
Hit that like button if you enjoyed this, share it around, share it, and subscribe for more. Drop a comment below with your views. See you tomorrow at the same time.